Okay, so I think I'll start now. So first of all, dear all, welcome back to the Creative PEC webinar series. After the success of the last year in academic terms, we decided to continue with this webinar series, and we have heard we are lined up fantastic speakers already for the autumn term. So thank you for joining us for the first seminar of the year with Simona Iammariono. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the Creative PEC, our aim is to improve the quality of evidence for the creative industries, inform inform industry and government priorities, and advance research into the longer-term challenges and opportunities facing the sector. After a first successful round of funding from 2018 to 2023, we have received further funding by the Arts and Humanities Research Council until 2028. And since June 2023, the Centre is hosted by Newcastle University in partnership with the Royal Society of Arts. Now, this seminar series is designed to showcase cutting-edge research and foster dialogue across academia, policy, and creative practice. Each online session delves into fresh research, followed by an interactive Q&A session. People can already sign up for the next two seminars in November and December on the events page of the Creative PEC website. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Professor Simona Iammariono from the University of Cagliari and the London School of Economics. Simona is a professor of applied economics at the Department of Economics and Business of the University of Cagliari in Italy. She's a visiting professor at the Department of Geography and Environment of the London School of Economics, where she served as professor of economic geography and the head of the department for a good stretch. Her main research interests lie in these areas: multinational corporations, globalization and local economic development, economic geography, innovation and technological change, regional and local economic development, and policy. And on these topics, she has contributed to the literature with numerous contributions, either in peer-reviewed journals with over 70 publications, with 2 co-author books, around 30 book chapters, and numerous working papers, policy reports, and other publications. She is co-editor of the Journal of Economic Geography, member of the Regional Studies Association Executive Group, and board and chair of the RSA Journal Committee. She has a long-term experience in externally funded international research projects and in consultancy projects for various international organizations from the European Commission, the OECD, the United Nations, ADB, and others, and numerous government agencies. She has recently been awarded the European Regional Science Association European Prize in Regional Science. I was present at the awarding ceremony, and also the Giacomo Beccattini Prize by the Italian Society of Economics and Industrial Policy. So before giving the floor to Simona, I'd like to give a quick reminder to all those online that this seminar is being recorded, and following Simona's talk, we'll have a Q&A session. So kindly use the Q&A function to pose your questions, and I will ensure that these questions reach Simona. While we may not be able to address every question during the session, rest assured that we'll do whatever we can to address your questions after the session to the best of our ability. And thank you for your cooperation. So without further ado, let me give the virtual floor to Simona, who will speak today about the cost of undoing Europe, Brexit, and the UK textile and the apparel industry. Thank you very much, Simona, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Giorgio and the Creative PEC team for this invitation. Really very welcome, and for the long and very flattering introduction. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. let me share screen. Okay, we tried this before and I hope it works. Right. Can you see the screen? I think.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this paper is it's part of a research line with my co-author Patrizia Casadei from LSE that is in the public at the moment in the audience on the cost of undoing Europe, Brexit and the UK textile and apparel industry. So I don't think I have to rehearse the past, and we all know Brexit happened in 2020, and then the UK leaving the single European market and custom union happened more or less a year later in January 2021, with trade and cooperation agreements coming into provisional effect. Now, the trade and cooperation agreement is, from many respects, unique because it actually reversed 48 years of membership of the European Union, started in 1973 for the UK, and basically reintroduced barriers to trade, so to flows of goods, services, flows of capital, investment, and people migration. So basically going back on the very important four freedoms that were the basis for the single European market. So in this sense, the TCA is introduced a new regulatory framework that saw the reintroduction of non-tariff barriers and indirectly the tariff barriers. This is an important aspect, and I'm going to spend the 20 seconds on this because the tariff barriers are, let's say, applied for everything that is non-UK, non-EU origin. However, the weight, the burden of proof of origin now apply again to British firms, which in the first year of Brexit is estimated that at least 30% of firms actually prefer to pay the tariff instead of going through the very burdensome process of dealing with the bureaucracy associated with the rules of origin. So in fact, there are indirect tariff barriers that then became quite direct. So Brexit offered this unique, I mean, with no historical precedent, obviously, a way or anti-monde example from to see what happened in the case of going backward in time, basically, and reverting from the European integration process. So we know from the coast of non-Europe, the literature in the second part of the 80s and first part of the 90s that was trying to estimate and conceptualize the European market fragmentation cost, and therefore by a translation, the benefits of completing the single European market. And we know that the three key non-tariff barriers were physical, technical, and fiscal. These were the three big categories of barriers that were removed gradually or so during the completion of the single European market. This removal of non-tariff barrier were predicted by the literature on the cost of non-Europe, and here I mean, the most important documents, a lot of literature in economics, but in particular, we have to remember the Cecchini report and Emerson and others report in the 1988, both of them, that basically associated the removal of non-tariff barriers with short-term effects in terms of productivity gain, lower production costs and prices, increased competitiveness, and rise also in intra-European community trade, and medium-term effects in terms of adjustment in the strategy of firms in terms of geographical location, product lines, supply linkages, and customer markets, basically, and then long-term increase industry concentration, geographical agglomeration, and redistribution of economic activities in industries within the European Union, and higher technological innovation. So what, in a way, the cost of non-Europe literature, in a way, underestimated was the disruption of global value chains, because the intensity of global value chains and global production network became much faster and with a very rapid pace, particularly since the end of the 90s and in the 2000s onwards. So this literature somehow underestimate, put in a sort of marginal position the disruption of this value chain. So we also referred as an empirical framework to the much more recent Brexit research that there is plenty of, obviously, that emphasize instead the disruption of UK-EU value chains, and indicating that obviously this disruption would push firms to reconfigure task, change product range and lines, reshore, and so on and so forth. This literature also pointed out to the different effects across UK regions, and most of this research point out to the lower vulnerability of core regions in the UK, I mean the usual suspect, London, South East, Scotland, while I mean in the worst on weaker regions. However, a few studies suggested that UK economic cores could actually be hit quite dramatically because trade flows occur mainly through their ports. There is considerable macroeconomic evidence on the TCA impacts on UK and EU trade, and this evidence has very strong external validity. However, the literature on specific industries effect, value chains, or is just becoming published, and its line of research and still underknown for a specific case study. So our aim in this paper is to analyze firms' perception of the consequence of the withdrawal from the EU, so the cost of non-Europe, with respect to the effects of Brexit for firms and their upstream and downstream linkages, the type of strategies implemented in the aftermath of Brexit by firms to cope with the new situation, and sentiment of firms, generally speaking, towards Brexit, and also their suggestion for possible policy intervention. We focus on one particular industry, textile and apparel, because it's an industry that is particularly globalized, extremely vulnerable to value chain disruption and tariff barriers, due also to its nature, let's say labor-intensive nature. So for exploring this issue, we designed and implemented regional survey. The survey structure is simple, firm characteristics were obviously asked at the beginning, and focusing in particularly on production, product sold, manufactured, and the position of the firm in the value chain of the industry, the Brexit effects, so the perception of the firm from, of this withdrawal of the UK from the EU, and the strategic responses put in place by the firm to cope with the new scenario. And then finally, general feedback, overall impression, and interventions needed to support the industry. So the target population was the UK textile and apparel manufacturing firms, fashion and retailer. Across, we used Orbis data set, by Bureau van Dijk, and also lists that were provided by the main industry association, Fashion Council, Make It British, and by comparing and integrated all this information, we came up with, first of all, specific standard international classification category in order to make sure that we had the right firms belonging to the filière. And we came out, with the population of firms considering also, cleaning across of almost 17,000 firms. The distribution of the questionnaire happened between May and September 2022, Electronica using Qualtrics software, and it went to randomized samples of at different times in this few months. Non-responded received 4 reminders, and it was sponsored by the UK Fashion and Textile Association. The total responses was 1,358 questionnaire with 8% response rate, which was extremely high. We couldn't believe our eyes, actually, because also for surveys implemented by National Statistical Office, this is a good response rate. And the final sample, after cleaning, incomplete responses, duplicates, or firms that weren't really fitting in our categories, we had 1,008 responses. They were tested for non-response bias and were compared with the statistical information that we got from ONS with a variable on the target population. Now, sample characteristics. The sample characteristics tells us that we have the respondents were particularly firms that were more recent, established after 2010, although there were also quite a lot, 33% of firms that came from 1990s and earlier. That particularly high is the share of micro firms, so from 0 to 9 employees, 82%, so really micro, but this is a sector where an industry where normally across European countries you see small firm size, and the market is mostly middle market, and the type of firms is across upstream and downstream. For firms that go from the conception of the product to final manufacturing, so manufacturer, brand manufacturer, design, tailors, embroiderers, and the fashion houses. While for downstream, we have primarily firms delivering the products, so retailers, high street retailers, boutiques, and wholesalers and distributors. So you can see that over the full sample of a completed questionnaire, we have almost 90% of firms that declare to have been affected by Brexit, and 10% that said that this wasn't the case. So if we see the Brexit effect by value chain position, we can see that this is not really changing the picture, although downstream firms, those close to the market, seem to register a slightly higher percentage, yes, compared to the upstream, which is in line with you can see also that by geography, more or less, however, there are
Simona, sorry
yeah.
if I interrupt you, but at times I think when you're not speaking directly to the microphone, I think the quality of sound just goes down a bit. So just occasionally we can hear most of what you're saying, but there are sometimes at least that I'm struggling with. So
strange this, because it never happened before, huh?
Yeah, but I think it's fine now. It's totally fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry for it.
Sorry, no, sorry you. I mean, I hope, let me know if, you can see that the two regions that declare a slightly higher percentage of firms that said, no, we weren't affected by Brexit, are Wales with almost 20%, although we have also to consider the numbers. You can see the number of respondents that the regional distribution of the respondent, the size of firms, many other characteristics are representative of the targeted population of 17,000 firms. But nonetheless, I mean, Wales and Northeast show this slightly higher percentage of firms that didn't suffer for Brexit. So you can see also that, as I said, the sample is in fact representative of the population. The biggest share is from London, followed by the southeast, the northwest, and southwest, which is exactly the distribution of textile and apparel firms in the UK. So by looking at the cost of undoing Europe, we try to classify all the text that these firms were very, very willing to write a lot on the question. So on the basis of open-ended replies of 902 firms that declared to be affected by Brexit, we classify all these texts in terms of the categories given to us by the cost cost of non-Europe gathered from the literature. So fiscal, physical, and technical barriers on the one hand, supply side, demand side. This is a very elaborate and very detailed chart. We're still working on it, actually, but I can tell you that the gray boxes and green boxes were really pointed out heavily by firms as, you know, feeling the penalty of the withdrawal from the EU. Custom formalities, shipment delays, cash flow pressure, reduced skills and skills availability across the UK, increased labor costs, extra delivery, and so on and so forth. So we saw that the literature in the 80s, late 80s and 90s actually capture really very well what then we are able to see in our data. So you can see also the firm's strategic responses to the arrangement, to the agreement with the EU, and you can see that we had various options that the firms declared. This is obviously the percentage of each answer is calculated on the total number of Brexit affected firms, so 902, we can see that the reduction of the product range, the lines of product, is the most pointed out by firms as a strategy to cope. So 27% of firms indicated that as a strategy. Overall, we can see that overall, looking at this option by main category, so location of facility, product range, and upstream linkages and downstream linkages, we can see that, upstream linkages, so suppliers and supply base, was probably the strategies more put in place by firms, followed by relocation of facilities, headquarters, plants, warehouse moved from the UK to the EU in particular, but also the other way around. Okay, and customer base, so the revision, let's say, of market and downstream linkages was the least category of the least important among the category of strategies. So the difference between upstream and downstream see that in both there is this reduction of that was applied quite more or less by 30%. And that we can basically see that the downstream firms, as expected, applied relatively more relocation strategies as compared to upstream, while the upstream firms applied more of the both upstream and downstream linkages, so regarding of suppliers, of shifting from EU suppliers to UK suppliers, or revising also the market strategies. So in terms of geography, now we are still in the stage of actually crossing also strategies and geography, which is a slightly more complex operation, but we can see from this table that there are significant differences already. For example, in terms of location facilities, we can see that Scotland.
I'm sorry, Simona, your audio is going a bit funny again. I don't think it's just me. I think there are times where you appear muted. So can you talk again? Just a second.
Right. In the last 2 minutes, I don't understand. It's the first time that this appeared.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just a bit in patches, but it's we can hear you now, I think.
Right. Let me know, Giorgio. Let me know, because it's important that the message gets delivered.
Yeah, this is quite important part of the work. Yeah.
Okay, so Scotland had a particularly high share, 41% of firms that applied relocation strategies, okay, followed by Yorkshire and the Humber and Northwest. In terms of product range, Yorkshire and the Humber, again, firms were heavily relying on those strategies. In terms of supply base, what is outstanding, although the number of respondents is relatively small, 60% of respondents in Wales actually said that they have shifted the suppliers of input to the local, to the UK. And customer base, was in general the least option of strategies, but the regions that replied most heavily, relying on this kind of strategy, were East Midlands, Southwest, and East England. Now, sentiment towards Brexit, well, this survey showed clearly that textile and clothing firms were really upset and disappointed. The text that was left in the last open-ended question, just tell us about what you think, got more than 30,000 words, which is, in terms of academic paper, 3 full papers and more. I mean, so we are still thinking about how to elaborate this, but you can see the worst decision ever taken by the UK, a nightmare, a complete disaster. I mean, so the firms were absolutely negative. In terms of their policy suggestion, many firms said we have to rejoin the EU, or at least the single European market, the custom union, or renegotiate with the EU. This is interesting because it is happening right now. I'll say 2 words at the end of this. Reduce physical barriers, simplify processes, reduce the red tape, red tape and bureaucracy was one of the things that stood out more in this desperate firm's perception. Improved shipping times, as we know from the newspapers, right? Shipping had been a rather nightmare. Address fiscal barriers. In particular, some firms mention the revision of the cap on the import one-stop shop, and refund VAT, particularly for very small business, eliminate or address labor shortage in the sense of reattracting or simplifying entry of EU specialized workers, increase general government support, financial aid, subsidy for investment even in the EU, and alleviate general industry weaknesses that were, in many cases, were highlighted by the firm as being there before Brexit. So the conclusive on this research that, as said, is still phase of development, is that the findings fit perfectly the cost of non-EU literature of 40 years ago. So the reverse effect of the single European market completion: increased input production cost, higher price for consumer, lower variety, stronger entry barriers, lower mobility, particularly of specialized labor and also in research. Physical barriers were perceived as the most serious, followed by fiscal. Technical barriers seem not to be significant, at least for the textile and apparel industry. The disruption of the value chain and the breakage of the links with EU suppliers and customers was, in fact, a big factor. I mean, testifying the fact that in 1988 was probably not a factor that the literature reflected upon, but it's a major one, and also confirming that value chains in Europe are really very much continental more than global. As predicted by the Brexit literature, there is a variance also in terms of firm responses to the strategies applied to cope with the post-Brexit scenario. And there is a rise in demand, obviously, for UK products, which are, however, constrained by limited capacity, limited specialization, and the lack of skills nationally. General, obviously, discontent with Brexit. And, you know, we have the suggestion were more in the line of strengthening the national and regional manufacturing base to meet this potential growth in demand domestically, adapt also intervention to the regional different situation in the industry and the specialization in certain echelon of the value chain, certain stages, so targeting skill development according to the regional needs, facilitate support trade according to the region, this intersection between region and value chain stage came out quite clearly from our research. Finally, renegotiate ECA. I was reading The Guardian last night, and there is this interaction between van der Leyen and Starmer right on this, and the difficulties are anyway there. I mean, we hope for the benefit of everybody, not only the UK, but also the EU, that this will be somehow a solution will be found, but you know, there are serious problems still. The mobility of workers is one of the issue, one of the pillar of the single European market, and therefore it's something that the EU probably won't you know, converge very easily upon. So thank you very much, and sorry for this. I don't understand where it comes from. Yes, I can now stop sharing.
Thank you, Simona. No need to apologize. It's the beauty of being in online world that allows us to be closer, even at great geographical distance, but at the same time, it comes with some
because the signal, I'm connected to two network university, and it's perfect. The signal is very, very strong.
No, there are times 99% of the time we can hear you perfectly. So thank you very much. So I'd like now to open the floor for questions, and I can see that there is already one question by Sara Maioli. So the question is the following: the table on strategies adopted by firms, there is the last line that says acquisition of EU, rest of the world, customers, buyers. Now, if you were to separate between EU and the rest of the world, I would expect the former to drop and the latter to increase. Do you have any more information on this?
Okay, let me. Okay, share. So acquisition of, can you see it?
Yeah.
Of new EU, rest of the world, customer, buyers. Yeah, I mean, we can distinguish, but Patrizia, my co-author, can add something about it, though I'm not sure. I don't really remember. You can see that the percentages here are really very small, right? So the downstream strategies were really not the immediate reaction of these firms. I don't know. I mean, we can distinguish, but then you don't know how, you know, representative the shares are. Patrizia.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, exactly, Simona. So basically, we can distinguish in the effects. So in the open-end question, so among those replies, obviously you can detect the effects in terms of acquisition of EU or rest of the world customers, but not in this one. So not in the strategies. Our main point here was to detect between UK and not UK customers. So that's why we put together EU and rest of the world. However, I mean, we can go deeper in terms of understanding whether there is more EU or rest of the world if we look at the effects from the open-end questions. There, I mean, we have around 30,000 replies, open-end, I mean, words in terms of replies. So a lot of input there, and we can really go back to this point and see if you can differentiate a bit by looking at the EU and rest of the world differences.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting point raised, especially the analysis of the changes in value chains is quite important. Can I ask you, while people have time to pose other questions, can you remind me, because I may have missed the beginning, when was the survey implemented?
The survey was delivered to the firms through the Qualtrics between May, at the very beginning of May, and end of September 2022.
Okay, so clearly the rules were clear and they had already started to experience the effects.
Oh yeah, it was almost a year and a half after really, you know, leaving the single European market.
But one of the problems with many of the studies around the effects of Brexit is that, unfortunately, the effects of the implementation phase coincides also with the effects of COVID and the effects that COVID had on value chains, disruptions, and so on. So do you have in the survey any way to disentangle the effects of COVID from the effects of Brexit?
No.
Unfortunately, no.
No, unfortunately not. That's why we waited, right? Because, and we started in May 2022. Obviously, that there is probably a degree of overlap, but the firms were very specific. They were very specific on their, you can see that is really with the EU upstream, all that happened with EU providers of input, particularly upstream linkages. So it was very centered on the effect of Brexit.
You see.
And, you know, it would be very interesting. We shared also the results with the UKFT. We should probably be, and, you know, by and large, they said, this is what we hear. This is what we hear, in fact. And so
I think it's really an important point, but it seems like your solution was to try and wait a bit of time so that there was a separation between, at least in the perception of people, but it's really difficult to disentangle.
Giorgio, the problem nowadays in looking at the effects of disruption is constant, right? The Ukraine war now, look, I mean Israel, Gaza, and now, I mean, we don't know if
Iran, there are so many effects.
And then China with the US, and the US ports blocked by massive strikes. I mean, how you disentangle the, you know, sort of circular accusation, and yeah.
I have a question or probably more a comment by Jonathan Sapsed, who's thanks you for the instructive study, and is commenting that the results resonate with what niche British designers have told him, which is that they had previously exported substantially and effectively stopped because of the increased bureaucracy and costs. And he's commenting also, he hoped this would improve over time, but clearly doesn't seem to have improved over time. So
no.
Do you have any way to disentangle the response of designers? I think it would be quite interesting, of course, from the creative industry's perspective, to look at the different parts of the value chain or different parts of the sector, and those sectors that may be in the value chain but maybe more service oriented. Some of these may be exporting directly rather than supplying services to exporters. is there any way to disentangle the effects on designers going on the, back to the point raised by Jonathan?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jonathan. And if you have work on that, also send it this way, because it's very important to, triangulate and to compare with other research on the sector. We can focus on designer, right? And in our sample now, moreover,
I was checking, it was roughly 10% of the sample, probably.
Yeah, this is what exactly I was looking, because you have, where is it? Right, we have designers, or maybe for the public, it would be good to look at the sample again. Yeah, we definitely could look into it more specifically, because obviously we know who the firm are, right? And we have 13% of the sample affected by Brexit. All you can see that many are affected, and it's actually interesting because we can split between those affected and those non-affected. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously small numbers, but I mean, this is the type of firms along, as I was saying, the value chain. So from manufacturer to wholesaler, distributor.
And looking at this sample very quickly, I'm wondering, you may have shown this, and again, but have you done any analysis in terms of distribution or differences across firm size? So again, narratively, we know that the effects have been harsher on small, medium enterprises, and it's more difficult for nano. You have a lot of nano firms, actually, micro firms.
Exactly.
Yes,
Giorgio. I mean, the fact is that almost 100% of the firms are small or micro. Okay. Mm-hmm. And micro firms, as I said at the very beginning, is 82%. So we cannot really compare 90% of the sample with
20% of the sample, which should be the non-nano.
2%.
No. I mean the
micro versus small. The problem is that you cannot put together small, medium, and large.
Yeah. No,
I think it's not appropriate. So it's very. I mean, this is normal for textile and apparel industry, right?
I think what you're doing with this survey is particularly interesting because many official surveys miss the micro firms, and therefore you're not able to really assess the impact. And I think that's one of the interesting things about your survey and the way you can also sell you, because many of these micro firms are really missed by official surveys. I have to say that we did commission a study that was published in 2023 by colleagues at Aston Business School on the impact of Brexit, and they used the PEC survey, that were looking at the impact of coronavirus. And what is interesting there, and then again, I'm not sure whether it is possible to assess this, especially in a sample of micro firms, is the effect also support measures that were provided by the government. So I don't know whether your survey contains any information on what type of support, because in your interesting conclusions, you do provide some policy implications in terms of the type of support. And again, do you have any question in the survey that pertains to support that firms may have?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as I was saying, I don't know if I hope it was clear, right? That we have a question on. Let me just show here again, right? Share. Okay, this is really firm policy suggestions that were gathered again from these firms. We were laughing also, with other colleagues. It looks like in order to have firms completing questionnaires.
Sorry, you're again going, the audio is again.
Okay, no, I was saying that firms were very, very willing to write and to tell us, which make us laugh, right? You need Brexit to have firms completing questionnaire and so on. All suggested by the firms. And also their industry associations were actually pointing out a sort of lack of interest of government for the textile and apparel industry before Brexit. And this is what is reported in the literature also. However, these were all specifically mentioned by the firms. Most firms pointed to physical barriers, simplify red tape, processes, bureau, okay? Physical barriers and labor skills, labor.
Yeah, indeed. Again, we did publish again in 2023 a report that if you go on our website, I'm also mentioning for the audience, you can see we did our colleagues we commissioned from they did a survey analysis of small medium enterprises, and they looked specifically at the acquisition of talent and the increased what was emerging is clearly the impact of increasing hiring costs, especially for international talent, and the struggles felt by particularly small medium enterprises. And this is actually a very important point, because something that sometimes people miss when they talk about trade and global value chains is that it's not just the what happens at the border that matters. Trade policies are not just related to trade agreements, tariffs, and so on. They are also related to what happens in the goods market and competition regulation, what happens in the labor market and labor market regulation, and therefore also in terms of education and skills and the provision of talent in the pipeline, all things that make a country more competitive. And so given that we are close to finishing time, I think there is one last question from Bruce. So Bruce Tetter is asking, among the 8% of firms responding to the survey, are you absolutely sure you don't have response bias with those negatively affected by Brexit, or being run by Remainers being more likely to respond? So it's really a question about sample bias and whether people who have responded may be more prone to being critical. I would say, in addition to, if I wanted to play devil's advocate, that clearly many of the anticipated benefits of Brexit are supposed to happen in the longer run, whereas this is really the short run impact of having to cope with red tape and additional costs. So I think the question from Bruce is really in terms of potential sample bias, and then I guess on the short versus long run.
I'll quickly reply, and then I'll leave Patrizia to integrate. The sample is representative of the population. Okay, at the geographical, by firm size, and a number of other variables. So this is what we got. We checked for also non-response bias, and therefore basically what we did, there is, the issue of late respondent, those that respond after various reminders over time, that might have to be more similar to non-responded at all, and that was not the case. Okay, so we are sure about these two facts. Patrizia, is there anything else we can add on the?
Yeah, about the we calculate like the representativeness of the sample in terms, as Simona said, early and late respondents by comparing the means. And then we also checked like some of the variables comparing the target population with the characteristics of our sample. So basically what we know is that like our population has characteristics similar to the sample to target population. I think like that we can reply a bit to the fact that maybe like firms, I mean the those that vote like for leaving or remaining. So the vote issue could be answered the fact that we received so detailed text and replies from firms that the facts that they described to us were so specific and so detailed that and also like from firms that replied we have not been affected. So I think this is probably the only thing that can assure us. The other things a bit difficult to prove.
Thank you, Patrizia. I think Bruce commented also that as a suggestion that you may look at the response of dropouts that could give some indication of bias. So unfortunately, due to time constraints, I think we need to move very quickly to the end. If I can give a final comment, I think it's very often in the trade literature, people talk about the effects of trade liberalizations and how clearly there are reallocations across producers and firms in terms of the shock of trade liberalization. In a way, the undoing of the European single market, of the link between the European single market and the UK provides an example of the opposite and a natural experiment to see what happens in terms of, for example, the inclusiveness of trade policies when you have exactly the opposite effect. I think it's a very interesting way to look at things in a slightly different context where normally trade liberalizations are criticized, understanding what is the penalty cost, if you like, for smaller firms or in terms of trade inclusions in general. Now, thank you very much for your presentation. So first of all, in terms of closing, thank you again, Simona, thank you, Patrizia, for being here with us and for such an engaging presentation on, again, such an important and contemporary topic, given the upcoming renegotiations not too far away from in the future. So I'm sure that the audience will agree that thanks to your research, we now have a much broader picture and understanding of the impact of Brexit on the specific sector you analyze. Now, I'll also like to take the opportunity to thank our funders, in particular the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the team at Newcastle University and the Creative PEC, in particular Elisa Millen and Tom Camille-Jones for all the hard work needed to make this webinar happen. And looking ahead, I'm excited to announce the next seminar speaker, Professor Karol Borowiecki from Southern Denmark University will give a talk on the 7th of November on competing for equality, gender bias among juries in international piano competitions between 1890 and 2023. For those of you who know Karol's work, I know that you'll be waiting eagerly for his talk. So annotate the event in your calendars for the 7th of November as we dive deeper into the dynamic world of creative economy research. Thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next seminar. Thank you again all. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Patrizia.
Thank you very much.
You to the
Thank
team.
you, Giorgio, and all the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. So I think, Elisa, if we need to close the webinar.